All right, we've got breaking news of this hour from the Washington Post about a meeting between Trump's attorneys back when John Dowd was on the team in March with Robert Mueller himself, in which the attorneys floated the idea that the president wouldn't be talking to them, and Robert Mueller floated back the notion of subpoenaing the president of the United States. It was apparently a tense meeting, and it was in that meeting when they talked about the topics and areas and subjects and questions they would like to talk to the president about, notes that were then written down by Jay Sekulow, the president's legal team. And it is that document that has been leaked. It came to the New York Times yesterday, and we've been parsing all day here to help me understand what Trump is really saying and what the White House is trying to do from a spin perspective, which I think has been deceptively effective. New York Times op-ed columnist Michelle Goldberg, Shelby Holiday, The Wall Street Journal, and attorney Lisa Green. So you've got so many ways in which there's one part of the White House's approach, which is just for the Trump base, which I think is like, let's just put that to the side. Like, it's a crazy deep state conspiracy involving like 1 million like mid-level FBI agents you've never heard of unless you watch Hannity every night. Like, I don't think that's working on anyone except that crew of people.
But there is a working the refs that's working on the rest of us, right? There is this sort of bludgeoning people into accepting certain terms of the debate. I mean, just the fact that we treat collusion as something that is a big question mark. There is so much evidence in the public domain of collusion. We don't know if whether any of it rises to a criminal level, but there is simply no question that the Trump administration welcomed Russia's help in sabotaging Hillary Clinton's campaign. There's none. And so the fact that we even talk about collusion as an outstanding issue, the fact that we don't consider it an admission of guilt, or at least admit something suspicious, that Trump is so afraid of this process, that, I mean, it is his responsibility as president to participate in, kind of the lawful administration of justice. And we just
take care that the laws are faithfully executed, as the Constitution of the United States says.
Well, speaking of ways in which the president can behave in a normative way that we would be used to, in typical situations, the whole notion that the president might not voluntarily cooperate with an investigation about our electoral process seems like political suicide. But those days are over. And as you say, the president is clearly going to his base and saying things like 49 questions. It's so many.
Right.
and so many topics. And we're no longer in normal times where that is considered an outlier.
Well, I think there are 3 reasons that this strategy is actually effective, at least for right now. That could change, obviously, down the road as we learn more from Mueller. But first of all, the investigation is incredibly complicated. It engulfs many, many players, a lot of different Trump associates, a lot of different Russians. It's hard to even keep their names straight. It's a really complex investigation. Trump also has some pretty powerful players on his team. He has members of Congress. The House just shut down their intelligence investigation without even pursuing important lines of questioning or pursuing the people who could sit at the crux of collusion. He has major players in the media out there kind of hammering away every night, like you said, Hannity, but also tabloids. He's got a lot of people on his team, Breitbart. And then I also think there is something to this, confusion about how the investigation came to be in the first place. Right now, the talking point is like, so some guy writes a memo, and then there's another memo, and they're just using memos to spark this special counsel.
But the fact that
and when you think about it, I mean, you have to stop and think about why these memos exist. It's because of the president's behavior, but it really confuses people.
Right, but it confuses people, and there's, I think, a lot of people who should know better and have a responsibility to do better, who've been, kind of participating in that confusion and not calling it out when there's blatant lies and blatant misrepresentation.
There's also one thing they've done that I think has been weirdly effective is they just repeat the phrase "no collusion" every chance they get. Anytime anyone in that White House, the president. Now, as you said, they refer to it like it's already been established.
Dodgy dossier. How many times have we heard that?
Listen to this. Listen to this. Just a little brief montage of them talking about it. Take a listen.
Russian collusion. Give me a break.
Just so you understand. There's been no collusion. There's been no crime.
There has been no collusion. There was no collusion at all. No collusion.
And to Michelle's point, it's like, even that isn't, it's not clear that's the case.
It's clear that is not the case. I mean, I think, there was a Washington Post story recently about how Trump bullied his way onto the Forbes richest list and how he tricked the guy into making him think he was a billionaire, and the guy thought that he was really calling him out by saying that he was only worth $200 million. And in fact, he was worth $5 million. And I think that that's what he does. He sort of he takes this stance that's so far out there, moves the political center of gravity so far towards him that even the response, well, there might be collusion, is itself a distortion.
Well, the funny thing is collusion's not even a crime. So when he says this, I mean, you have to really parse.
Collusion's not a crime, but collusion
words.
should be a presidency-ending scandal. It should be in a decent, in a normal.
It's a term for a number of crimes that we refer to.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, to the extent of they say collusion's not a crime. In fact, the president today was no collusion. Also, collusion's not a crime, which is a little arguing the alternative. But it is true that if you, for instance, engage in a federal conspiracy to violate campaign finance law or the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is what we would think of as collusion, that's also a federal crime.
So that takes more words to the point of it's too complicated. But I think Mueller inadvertently, because surely he didn't want an outline for his questions leaked, laid out what I think is a pretty simple narrative. Most of those topics, I dare say all of those topics, looked familiar if you have a passing familiarity with the recent news in the past year.
Or an obsessive one.
That was not that hard to see the themes.
And it also shows that he's staying within his mandate, which I think is really important at this point, because to the strategy of Trump trying to discredit the investigation, he keeps saying, financial crimes, this porn star, he's just going crazy. These questions show he's absolutely not.
But that's another perfect example of part of the strategy. So one problem of the strategy, no collusion. The other is this idea of you have a narrow bailiwick. And what's sort of fascinating about that is it's implicit in all the people around the president. Of course he's committed other crimes. They don't even come and say, but they're just no, you can't. Oh my goodness, don't look in there. Don't look in that room. That room is off limits. If you open the door to that room, we're going to get really mad. It's well, what the heck's behind that door? But they have been really effective, I think, in setting this idea of red lines and boundaries.
You can go down a rabbit hole and decide that the news of the raid on his doctor's offices is yet another diversion designed to make us all lose our minds and not stay focused. Rest assured, Mueller's team, highly focused. They gave those questions. I'm sure they're, disgusted that they were made public, and now we read of these negotiations.
They had to anticipate it, though, didn't they?
But they also tie some of the things that have been said by Trump to not be related to collusion into collusion. For example, the real estate deal, the Trump Tower Moscow deal, or Paul Manafort's dealings with people. For a long time, President Trump has said Paul Manafort, he did his own weird stuff. He was a consultant. Now this is hinting at the fact that Paul Manafort asked these people for help. So it's bringing it into the campaign.
But those arguments are so ridiculous that it is a shame on our country that those arguments are even taken seriously. The arguments that Paul Manafort's entanglements with Putin-allied oligarchs are somehow orthogonal to the rest of the investigation, or my attempt to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, which a criminal linked to the Russian mafia said would result in my election, in an email to my lawyer, Michael Cohen, who has been raided by the FBI. The idea that this is some kind of bizarre tangent that is not germane to the main issue itself, I think, shows how much they have successfully been able to kind of mess with us and mess with our understanding of what's right in front of our face.
Except that in the end, what's going to matter more? Our own sense of a general public confusion about what's really important, or the results of the Mueller investigation, which I'm pretty confident are going to be directed. And by the way, the president may decide not to cooperate. And Mueller may decide to subpoena him, but Mueller may also decide not to and conclude his investigation with other evidence.
But that's, this idea that the facts will out, right? The truth will out, and it matters what he finds. And I believe that, right? But the other thing is it is a political process. They could find literally a text from the president saying to Vladimir Putin, today is the day to release the hacked emails. No, I'm serious. And what? Maybe you don't get 2/3 votes. The point is that if they are successful,
House Republicans would say that's not a crime.
Right. If they are successful in holding their base and in spinning all this, right? We want to say, well, the facts are out, and even if there's indictable offenses, which I'm sure Robert Mueller would call your attention to, fundamentally they understand this. They understand it's a political game.
I think that's why we're not seeing anything beyond what's been reported in the news in the questions from Mueller, because a lot of people were actually disappointed that they weren't looking at some of Trump's business deals or some of the potential financial leverage that Russia could have on him.
Well, they're looking
that hasn't really been hashed out in the news, and a lot of legal experts say Mueller is probably not trying to freak President Trump.
Well, that I think is true. I also think it's true that we don't know that it's a complete list. There is no. This is Jay Sekulow's notes. Yeah. Maybe he didn't put everything down, or maybe he put down another 20 questions. They were no, don't leak that. We have no idea, right? The whole thing's coming through their side. It obviously came through Trump channels. The final thing I'll say here, and I think, is the way they've made obstruction of justice, like some sort of like subsidiary. It's like that's like jaywalking. Like it's like, well, there's collusion. That's a serious thing, and there's no collusion. And then if you try to get me on obstruction, he says tweets this morning, it would be very hard to obstruct justice for a crime that never happened, witch hunt. Jeff Smith, who's a former state senator from Missouri, a friend of mine, been on the show. He did multiple years in federal prison because he lied to the FBI investigation in which there was no underlying crime. He says it's possible to commit felony obstruction of justice without the underlying act being a felony. Hashtag trust me. All right. Jeff knows from where he speaks, but they have, I think, been somewhat successful in sort of cordoning off obstruction as a subsidiary issue.
And some of them are the same people, like literally the same people who pushed for the impeachment of Bill Clinton for lying to, for lying about something that was very clearly not an underlying crime.
Right. One other point I would make, if we have time, is I was talking to a legal expert who said, if you look at what Comey did with Hillary Clinton, like they exhausted every single bit of evidence and talked to every witness, and they saved her for the end.
Yep.
And in her case, that was a good thing because they didn't find anything criminal, but they had to exhaust everything. They had to talk to her. And you could make the same case about President Trump. He hasn't been interviewed yet. They might just be wanting to exhaust all of their leads. And that would be a good thing, except President Trump has bashed the fact that Hillary Clinton was interviewed after the investigation concluded.
She complied and did not invoke the Fifth Amendment. And the point here is, like, she didn't go crazy about, you know what I mean? Like, ultimately, she went and faced the fire. And the question here is, like, if the president doesn't do that, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this has been going on for months, this debate about whether, almost like a reality show, will he or won't he? Will he cooperate or not? But, the prosecutors have day jobs, and they probably have a schedule. And a lot of Trump supporters have advocated for a quick end to this investigation. Query whether Mueller goes forward without him.
Michelle Goldberg, Shelby Holiday, and Lisa Green, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Still ahead, President Trump's doc.